الآن وباسم
On behalf of the General Assembly, allow me to welcome His Excellency Salvador Sanchez Seren, the President of the Republic of El Salvador. May I request protocol to escort His Excellency.
الآن أطلب من فخامة
I have great pleasure in welcoming His Excellency, the President of the Republic of El Salvador, and I invite him to address the Assembly.
Excelentísimos,
Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, and colleagues, Mr. Secretary General of the United Nations, and President of the 73rd session of the General Assembly of the United Nations, ladies and gentlemen, I congratulate Maria Fernanda Espinosa, a sister from Latin America, on her election as President of the 73rd session of the General Assembly. And I would like to pay tribute to Kofi Annan, whose most commendable work heading the United Nations left us with a great legacy of peace and a fairer international economic order. El Salvador conveys its condolences over the recent death of the President of the Republic of Vietnam, Tran Dai Quang. And may I extend our solidarity to the people and government of the United States over the damage done by Hurricane Florence, and to the Philippines and China, who have also suffered from devastating typhoons. Distinguished delegates, this year we are called on to make the United Nations relevant to all people. Global leadership and shared responsibility for peaceful, equitable, and sustainable societies. We want to reach everybody without any discrimination whatsoever. We want to provide public policies and effective, good tools so as to meet the needs and aspirations of the people. This has been a priority for El Salvador during my term of office. Our social protection programs have been successful in helping over 400,000 people emerge from poverty between 2015 and 2017. The 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda has become a very useful tool for implementing our national policies. We were one of the first to adopt Agenda 2030 with a view to minimizing the consequences of decades of extreme social inequality and a historic lack of interest on the part of our state to meet the needs and demands of our people. El Salvador joins the appeal of the Secretary General Antonio Guterres about the urgent need to close the funding gap for the Sustainable Development Objectives. We have allocated about 50% of our national budget to social development. This is unprecedented in my country. However, despite all of our efforts, our national resources will not be adequate, and it is essential that the international community shoulder its part. The contributions it makes must be part of an integrated long-term approach to ensure inclusive economic growth and to bring millions of people out of poverty, for today they are suffering from the worst consequences of climate change and unfair distribution of wealth. For middle-income countries like El Salvador, the key is to support and complement what we can do by way of funding, particularly public funding. Our country is vulnerable in many respects. Recently, we had one of the longest droughts in our history, and this was something which was caused by climate change. This meant that we had to invest more to ensure food security for families and to keep food prices stable. To deal with the situation, it's essential that the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change continue to operate, and that a solution be found to the current crisis of the Green Climate Fund. El Salvador is a country that produces virtually no pollution, but it does suffer from the effects of climate change, which is caused by others. We urgently need access to funding in order to mitigate and adapt so as to make our people safe and resilient. With the Bonn initiative, we are now moving to large-scale restoration of our ecosystems. And this is an example of how a small country with limited financial resources can in fact protect its environment. Here I would like to express my profoundest thanks to Mr. Eric Solheim, Executive Director of the UNEP, the United Nations Environment Programme, for supporting our proposal to declare 2020 to 30 the United Nations Decade for Ecosystem Restoration. And we would invite this General Assembly to consider that initiative in a coordinated manner in order to tackle the ever faster loss of forestry, the soil degradation and the degradation of ecosystems, which have a negative impact on the well-being of 3.2 billion people. We were one of the heads of state who, at the unforgettable and historic session of the General Assembly in 2015, adopted Agenda 2030, and today we have achieved real results, seeking to reduce poverty and reduce inequalities. My government has given priority to social protection in our development strategy, and we have reduced poverty by 10% between 2009 and 2017. We also adopted a national literacy program. We now have 100 municipalities which have no illiteracy, including San Salvador, which has become the third Central American capital to achieve this. We will continue to promote literacy, and here we have the generous support of over 50,000 young volunteers and other sectors in society that are helping us. And in this endeavour, we have found extremely useful the support of the people and government of the sister Republic of Cuba, who are an example for Latin America and the world in eliminating illiteracy using the method, Yes, I Can. We are defending women's rights. We have a strategy for preventing femicide and sexual violence. This involves all governmental institutions. We are seeking to empower women and ensure they have a life free from violence. This was strengthened with the initiative called Spotlight, supported by the European Union and the United Nations, and it seeks to eliminate social practices and institutional practices that offend the dignity of women. We have also promoted the program Women's City, which is universally acknowledged and applied. This has led to over 1.8 million people getting health services, help in defending their rights, job training, and funding for economic projects. In the area of health, may I mention our national strategy for reducing maternal mortality and our national plan for monitoring health. These two tools have helped El Salvador reduce its maternal mortality rate. In 2017, it was down to 31 per 100,000 births. In these very important efforts, we have had the spiritual guidance and a message of peace for social justice from the Blessed Oscar Arnulfo Romero, who on 14 October will be canonized by Pope Francis. This is a historic event, and our people will be celebrating with joy and hope. Mr. President, one particularly relevant issue at the global and regional levels is migration. We welcome the upcoming adoption of the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration and the Global Compact for Refugees. These are clear examples of how the United Nations is involved in seeking new worldwide consensus. We have to look at migration from the standpoint of human rights so that we can benefit from it and so that we can take up the challenges it faces us with. This year, many migrant families, coming mainly from the Northern Triangle in Central America, have faced very difficult and painful situations because they have been separated. This has done irreparable psychological and emotional damage to girls, boys, and teenagers. The higher interests of the child and the family must be respected, regardless of their migration status. May I reiterate El Salvador's request to the United States authorities to speed up the process of reunification of minors who arrive at the border, whether or not they are accompanied by their family members. In recent years, El Salvador has been working to improve living conditions by promoting investment, developing human capital, promoting security, preventing violence, combating criminal trafficking networks and drug trafficking inter alia. This has helped us to reduce by 60% irregular migration of Salvadorans towards the United States. We absolutely reject any criminalization of migrants. Experience has shown that with their work ethic, they contribute to the economic, social, and cultural development of the societies of destination. A clear example is our people who enjoy temporary protection status and the DACA program. And for years, they have been contributing to the progress of the nation. We want to urge the competent bodies in the United States to apply the legal instruments to provide greater migration stability and permanent residency for people under the TPS and DACA programs. Mr. President, El Salvador is a founding member of the United Nations. We respect international law. We acknowledge the importance of multilateralism in taking up global challenges, such as peace, a fairer economic order, climate change, migration, and sustainable development. And so, we stress the need for constructive dialogue, reaching agreements, cooperation, strengthening the mechanisms for integration and regional alliances. Given the crisis and conflicts in the world today, it is really important to focus on dialogue and political solutions. On 30 June last, there was a meeting of the presidents of the SICA countries in Santo Domingo, and we spoke about the situation in our sister Republic of Nicaragua. We would once again call for dialogue and reaching agreement. This is the way to build and preserve peace, vis-à-vis with respect for the Constitution and the rule of law. To ensure that the international community moves ahead towards development, we must stop unilateral measures such as the unjust and anachronistic economic, trade and financial blockade imposed on Cuba by the United States. That coercive measure must end because it brings such incalculable damage to the Cuban people. Also, an end must be put to economic sanctions against the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. This affects its international payments and the provision of goods and services, and it really harms the living conditions of the people. We call for respect for self-determination and sovereignty for the Venezuelan people. We reject external interference and threats of military intervention. Mr. President, I would like to thank the United Nations and the Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, for the valuable contribution to our development programs for the well-being and tranquility of Salvadoran families. We would thank them also for the support they've provided for our national dialogue and to build new agreements following on from the peace agreements which we signed in January of 1992. El Salvador is determined to contribute to anything the United Nations can do to make sure that the United Nations is relevant to all people, provides global leadership and shared responsibility for peaceful, equitable and sustainable societies. We are sure that with the commitments we have undertaken under the 2030 Agenda, we will move ahead in building an El Salvador that is united, prosperous and peaceful. Thank you very much.
باسم الجمعية العامة.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I would like to thank His Excellency Salvador Sanchez, the President of El Salvador. I ask the representative to stay in their place while we escort His Excellency.